Hello, for those of you that have just joined us on our interview skills webinar. We're just about to start. I think we're just waiting for a few more people to come through. So while we're doing that, we'll just go through a couple of introductions and a little bit of general housekeeping. We've only got 30 minutes, so we've got quite a lot of content to pack in. So we'll start with some introductions. So my name's Stuart Moore. I am the Managing Director of Plus One Recruitment. I've been in the recruitment industry now for just coming up to 25 years. And hopefully there's one or two sort of little tips and tricks that I can pass on to you from that time. I am joined today by my colleague and our recruitment manager here, Daniel Marlowe. Daniel, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My tale in recruitment's a little bit less than Stuart's. I've only been in it for 3 years, but yeah, I'm the team manager here, and I'll look forward to supporting Stuart.
Thanks very much. Dan is going to be managing our chat box. So because it's a 30-minute condensed webinar, we won't have the opportunity to answer any questions during the actual session, but please feel free to put any questions in the chat. If there is anything that you would like us to go through in a bit more detail, then we're more than happy to take it offline and have a conversation with you at a more convenient time. So just finally, before we start, at the end of the webinar, so perhaps later on this afternoon, you'll receive an email from me asking for your feedback. I promise it literally is about 5 questions. It will take you 30 seconds to fill in. I know how much people get spammed by questionnaires, so I appreciate that. But if you do fill that in, we'd be very grateful. But also on the back of filling that in, we will send out a copy of our interview cheat sheet, which we will discuss in the webinar, but it's something that you can give out to your hiring managers or anyone else in your business who is responsible for recruitment, and hopefully it will prompt them and guide them through their interviews. Okay, so let's start then. So today we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of interviewing. And as always, we have a eclectic mix of experience in the room. Some of you will recruit regularly, perhaps as part of your job if you're in recruitment yourself. For others, it may be a little bit fewer and further between. So appreciate everyone's viewpoints. But today, what we're going to be covering is all of the fundamental basics of what we believe makes up a good interview, and ultimately will help you to hopefully make the right hiring decisions for your business. So as you can see, we're going to be covering areas such as candidate motivation. And for those of you who attended our candidate engagement webinar a fortnight ago, some of this will blend with some of the content from that webinar. We're going to be talking a little bit about engagement and ghosting again, because it is part and parcel of the interview process nowadays, unfortunately. But also a little bit about interview styles and questions and where and when you should use those appropriately. Fine. So like I said, we'll send out the interview prompt sheet with the questionnaire, that's the word, at the end. Right. I always like to start a webinar with some stats. So according to a poll on LinkedIn, about 76% of managers admit that attracting the right candidates is their biggest challenge in terms of the business success. So interesting that less than 3% of hiring managers have ever had any formal interview training. If you're one of those, then you're more than welcome. Thank you for attending. Many line managers who are inexperienced can feel nervous about interviewing candidates because they're perhaps a bit unsure about what questions they are or aren't allowed to ask. Interesting, and you can, of course, find these stats yourself. The cost of hiring the wrong person into your organization is generally around 30% of their first year's salary. And that's without, as I put on the last point there, any fallout which could come as part of the disruption of somebody joining and then exiting your business relatively quickly. Certainly if they're in customer facing roles, that could potentially lead to loss of customer or losing accounts or general, decrease in morale in the group. So again, that's partly why we put this together, to help you to make the right choices. So, a few basic interview tips here, and these apply to whether the interview is either face-to-face or whether you're conducting it via video. So we always recommend that you prepare a list of around 6 to 10 questions that you can ask that will be used across all of your candidate interviews for a particular role. That then means that you're getting an equal balanced skill score on each of your interviews and that the interview process is fair. Again, some of these might sound basic, but that's what this is about. It's sort of nailing down some of the basics as well as the more complex stuff that we'll come on to. Emailing a calendar invite to your candidate, very important. So they've got it in their inbox. Ensure you have a copy of the candidate's CV before the interview. Gives you an opportunity, therefore, to actually scan the CV itself, perhaps make a few notes about points that you'd wish to discuss with the candidate outside of those 6 to 10 standard questions. And also make sure you conduct the meeting in a private space. So please don't interview candidates in your reception or in an area where they're going to be in some way uncomfortable. Now, obviously, if it's a video interview, then you could ignore that. But the point is to allow them time to settle in their environment, which will be alien to them. Most people do get a bit nervous before an interview, so it just helps to calm the nerves a little bit. Now, lastly, which almost runs against what I'm doing here in terms of the conversation flow or lack of, the 80-20 conversation rule. So what I mean by that, if you're not familiar with 80-20 or Pareto's law, is you should be listening 80% of the time. They should be talking 80% of the time. So you should be talking 20% of the time. That makes sense. Amazing how many times I've overheard interviews or interviewees that can't wait to tell the prospective candidates all about the job, all about why it's great to work at the company, and all about the benefits and all that lovely stuff. They get off the phone call, or they get off the meeting, and you ask the person, okay, well, sounds like a possible candidate. What do you know about them? And they sort of look a bit blankly and actually, I didn't ask any questions. Okay, a rookie mistake, but it does go on. So really, really important to listen and actually just let the candidate explain and talk. Obviously gives you a chance to make notes and to think about what you might want to ask them next. Really, really super important. And for the HR people in the room, you might wince at this one, but please don't ask any questions about protected characteristics. Most of us know what they are. So anything to do with age, race, gender, disability, anything that's protected should absolutely not form part of your interview questionnaire. On that note, if you have application forms or anything else that still ask questions like gender, ethnicity, anything again which could be protected, you might want to ask yourself, do we really need to be asking those questions? Part of what we're doing today is not just giving you some tips to how to hire the right people, it's also potentially how to avoid a potential lawsuit, which I'm sure none of you want. So yeah, again, something to pass on to your hiring managers, and that's what all this is about in case of any potential banana skins. So the first thing we're going to start with is really not just straight into the interview questions. And this is partly a bit of an overlooked element, but really, really, really important. And that's to assess the candidate's motivation. So what I mean by that is, why are they actually here? Why are they sat in front of you? Why have they applied for the position? But most importantly, why are they on the job market in the first place? Okay. Now, as it says on the bullet point here, according to Benenden Health, changing jobs is right up there in terms of a stressful life journey for most people. So if you think about, the big milestones in your life, moving house, having a baby, maybe your first job, getting married, all of those big milestones, for a lot of people, changing jobs is up there with those milestones. Okay. So if you're in recruitment or you're interviewing candidates all the time, it's very, very easy to forget just how important this is to the person sat in front of you. And that's why it's really, really important to properly understand why they're in front of you so that you can assess whether what you've got to offer actually matches what they're looking for. And we'll come on to why that's important in a moment. So I like using the sort of doctor analogy here because if you can imagine you're going and see a doctor and, first thing the doctor normally asks is, okay, tell me what's wrong with you. It'd be really weird if you went into the doctor's surgery and they said, I know exactly what's wrong with you. Take 2 codeine, 5 paracetamol, and a bunch of other tablets or medication, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Like, well, hang on a minute. You don't even know what's wrong with me. And what I'd like you to think about is when you're interviewing a candidate and you want to assess the motivations, this is exactly like that. Okay. So the reason this is important is if you don't find this out, if you don't understand what the person's pain points are and why they're putting themselves through this process, there's a very high likelihood that at some point in the recruitment process, things will fall apart. Simply because we haven't understood their pain points or matched it correctly. So on the slide, you can see there's a few sort of standard reasons as to why people might be on the job market. Obviously, if it's a situation such as redundancy, then it's a security issue. If it's salary, then it's a financial pressure. If it's commuting, and we're seeing certainly over the last 18 months, there's been a real shift post-pandemic to businesses sort of increasing the amount of office time they're expecting their candidates to put in, as opposed to, 3 or 4 years ago, everyone was saying, "Yeah, we don't need offices anymore, and we're all going to work from home, and this is the new normal." Very quickly, that started to reverse when the economy started to reverse. So that may well put a pressure on the individual who, when they could work remotely, didn't have to do an hour's commute. Now they're having to come in 3, 4 days a week. That's putting a pressure financially. It's adding 2 hours a day out of their family time. All of these things, it's important for us to assess. Lastly, one of the areas which no one ever confesses to is their relationship with their manager. Because there's a famous saying, isn't there, that people don't leave companies, they leave their manager. How many people would actually say to you, actually, the reason I'm looking is because I hate my boss. I just don't get on with it. I just, every time I go in and they talk to me, it just fills me with anxiety. I can't sleep on a Sunday night because I just don't want that person, barking at me the next day. No one ever says that. So equally, no one's going to ever say to you, you know what, I'm actually really bad at my job. For the last 3 months, my boss has been sitting me down and trying to instruct me, and I just keep getting it wrong. And they've told me I'm on a final warning, and if I don't get it right, I'm out the door. No one ever says that. Okay, so how do we get to the truth? But more importantly, when you're asking these questions, keep asking yourself, does the job that I'm about to talk to them about address any of these pain points? And again, if it does, fantastic. You're halfway there. If it doesn't, yeah, it's a question. So, okay, so some basic questions you might want to ask at this point of the interview. Very, very straightforward. Why? Why are you here? Why are you looking for a new job? And then again, 80-20 rule. You shut up, let them do all the talking. Okay, we're listening out and wanting to really understand why they're here. If it's something like redundancy, then fine. Unfortunately, that does happen. We're seeing a lot of company restructuring at the moment, and perhaps the job market right now isn't as strong as it was a year, 18 months ago. So that's very likely. You could absolutely take that on face value. That's fine. But what I would say is it's always a very good idea to follow that up with a secondary question. I'll put a few examples on there. Okay, so I understand you're being made redundant. That's unfortunate. So why? Why is your role being made redundant? You know, what's going on in the business right now that is causing this to happen? What you'll find is that most candidates who are prepped for the interview, and please remember, as a recruiter, we have two sets of customers. So part of what we do is prep candidates for interviews. They'll be ready for the first question. So they'll have their reasons for looking around up their sleeve. But what they won't necessarily prep for is the follow-up question. So it's the why, the why, the why, the why. The more you do that, the closer you are going to be to finding the truth. And it may well be that they're being made redundant and it's happening to the whole department because perhaps the department's being outsourced, or perhaps the company is struggling financially, so they're having to take out a layer of middle management. Whatever it is, it will, because you're exploring it further, it will start to sound, or you'll start to pick up whether this is a plausible reason or not. Now, I have had this situation where after the second or maybe the third why from me, the candidate actually said, okay, yeah, fine. I need to be honest. I'm actually going through a performance review process. Fine. Thank you for being honest. But we do get to the truth. Other reasons why candidates might be looking. I'm looking for career progression. That's quite a common one. We sort of see that more, I suppose, in a sort of younger demographic. But again, what does that look like? One person's career progression could mean that they want to be managing director one day. One person's career progression might be that they just want to go on a few courses and become really good at what they do and become an expert, but they're not necessarily getting that opportunity. So again, does your opportunity offer that? Or, being objective, is your job a steady, not really any routes for progression? You just need someone in there just doing that job. And if they stay with the business for 2 to 3 years, that's fine. If they stay any longer than that, it's a bonus. So again, it's important to be honest. And if the candidate is champing at the bit to be your next regional director or whatever it might be, is this going to give them that opportunity? And certainly that's what your candidate's going to be thinking when they're assessing your choice against other opportunities they're looking at. So again, a few questions you could ask, have you addressed this with your current line manager? Some people haven't because maybe they're a little bit worried. And again, asking the why and going through the follow-ups. If we don't do this, and I hark back to what I said a few minutes ago, then you do have a much higher likelihood of your candidate withdrawing in the process. Because at some point, they are going to assess your opportunity against their pain points. And they're going to go, well, actually, I've got a couple of opportunities here. The biggest problem for me is that my business is now getting us to come in 5 days a week. And oh God, if I have to commute down that A34 one more time, I'm going to drive myself mad. Now, your opportunity is making them come in 5 days a week, but something else that they're going for is still offering hybrid flexibility. They will make that assessment for themselves, but it's very important that you do that, which is kind of why I'm laboring on the point a little bit. So that kind of neatly segues on to candidate ghosting. Now, I won't go through this in a huge amount of detail because we touch upon this a lot in our engagement webinar. But according to JobSite Indeed, 76% of candidates or job seekers have ghosted a potential employer in the past 18 months. So if you are seeing this more often, that's why. 61% of those surveyed said they'd feel quite comfortable about it, which is slightly worrying. Slightly concerning more than that is that 56% claim they've been ghosted by an employer. So perhaps we're not helping ourselves. I mean, we speak to candidates all the time that tell us that, they get frustrated about applying for jobs and they don't hear anything back. I get it. It's not easy always to respond to every application. But if you're using an ATS or something that kind of semi-automates the process, maybe that's something to look at. Worse still is when candidates go for interviews but don't get feedback. And Now that could be really damaging to your employer brand because it does nothing for your reputation. And clearly it's happening a lot. So something to think about. It's also increased since the pandemic, interestingly enough. So perhaps people are getting a little bit more comfortable with not turning up for interviews. Now, we do know that there was a recruitment boom just after the pandemic. So perhaps candidates had a lot more choice in that 18 months post-pandemic. So maybe they were a bit more casual about whether to go to interviews or not. But certainly it has picked up. So ghosting normally comes from a lack of engagement in the recruitment process. And that's usually in the early stages when they're making those choices about whether your opportunity is relevant for them or not, or heals their pain points. It's also not helped by technology. Now, most of the job boards that we use, so think about LinkedIn or CV Library or Total Jobs, they all make it as easy as possible for candidates to apply. They often have one-click apply. So often the candidate doesn't even read your advert. They're just like, oh, I'll just apply for that. Maybe it's an emotional response to a bad day at work, but maybe once they've slept on things, they're not really looking. They're just venting, I suppose, and applying for a few jobs in the process. But anyway, we can help that by, as I said, giving replies to applications, also trying to speak to candidates as quickly as possible. So if you are if you're a line manager and you're receiving the CVs either directly or maybe someone in HR is passing them on to you, if that person looks reasonably relevant, it's a really good idea to try and get in touch with them within the first sort of 48 hours. Okay, because if you're not speaking to them, I bet you bottom dollar someone else is. So if you can be maybe the first person that's spoken to them, let's say they've only just started looking, great, you've given yourself a little bit more time. But if you are, one of 20, and they're already at advanced stages with other applications, then again, good to speak to them, of course, but also very important that we find that out. So as I've said on the slides here, one of the other questions you should be asking is not only why they're on the market and what they're looking for, but also where are they in terms of their current job application processes. So if you ask that question, so what else have you got going on? Very, very simple. They might say to you, well, you're the first one that's come back to me. Fantastic. Okay, we're in the driving seat for now. Or they might say, well, actually, I've got an interview tomorrow. I've got a second interview on Monday. In which case you're thinking, okay, well, fine. A good follow-up question to ask if they are at further interviews, and some people haven't necessarily thought of this, is, okay, so if you're at second interview on Monday, what would happen if that business offers you the job? Well, if they're out of work and therefore finance and security are huge motivators to them, there's a fairly high chance if the role is more or less what they're looking for, they'll accept the job. Okay. So something you could do if you're particularly interested in this person after your chat is say, well, look, okay, I really like having a chat with you. I'm going to send all the details across to you about the vacancy, about the business. What I'd like to do is, if you're interested in what we talked about today, I would like you to consider coming and having a chat with one of my colleagues about this role before you make a decision on whether you're going to accept another role or not. We can't promise we're going to get you in before Monday, but if you are offered the position, then feel free to speak to the other employer and say, well, look, it's great you've offered me the role. I've got a couple of other interviews I'm going to that I've got booked. So please give me a couple of days to come back to you with a decision. Most employers are generally fine with that. So please don't feel like you can't ask that question. It might buy you an extra couple of days leeway to get the person in. Really important that you don't book the interview with the candidate until they have seen your job description and maybe EVP. So never book the interview after that first initial 10-15 minute call. Always send them the information, let them consider it first, and then let them come back to you. What we find is most people that are going to drop out of an interview, it's because it's only at the point where they have to actually do something that they decide whether the job's right for them or not. And that could be as simple as looking you up on Google Maps and working out how long it's going to take to get to you every day, or how it stacks against another role, or whether they want to take a half day's holiday to come and see you for an interview. So all of those things will go through their mind before they agree to the interview, or certainly before they attend. And because it's a bit of confrontation, or maybe they don't feel comfortable turning you down, that's why you're seeing this rise in ghosting. A little bit like the dating scene. Not that I know a huge amount about that, sorry. But yeah, they'd rather say nothing than have an awkward rejection conversation. So again, one other thing I would say as well, actually really, really important, is never offer a candidate a job after just one interview. They haven't had time to assess it. They haven't had time to come back and talk to their spouse or partner about the role. We get a lot of very excited employers that love the candidate, get a really strong gut feeling, are worried about losing them to someone else. I want to offer them the job. I want to offer them the job. And they barely stepped out of the interview. If you're going to do that, fine. But what I would always say is let the candidate come back to you, even if it's just to have a tea, a coffee, and a quick chat, then give them the offer, because that's a further touch point. It crystallizes the decision for the candidate in their mind. It also gives them the opportunity to ask questions. Because how many candidates come out of an interview and go, I didn't even ask what the uniform policy was. I have no idea. Sometimes I have no idea. Sorry. I have no idea even what the salary is. So give them the opportunity to come back, even if it's the next day, or if it's a Teams meeting, if it's difficult to schedule diaries, but do have that extra touch point. A little bit like we don't book them for an interview until they've considered the options, so that you don't then get this sudden, oh, wow, that was a bit quick. I'm a bit shocked. That felt a bit easy. Maybe I'm a bit worried now. Maybe it felt too easy. There's a lot of psychology in recruitment that we need to think about, because, as I said at the very beginning, for someone, this will be a life-changing decision. For you, it might be a fairly insignificant role in your business, but for them, this might be a huge decision. I'm going to just quickly skim over these last pages because I'm conscious you've only got a few minutes left. But when you're looking at the CV, please just make sure, and again, this is prior to the interview, you're checking for things like gaps in employment, you're checking for people that move jobs frequently, a lack of education or qualifications on their CV. Just maybe make a few notes on the CV first, so that you can specifically ask questions about that candidate, especially where you see things, like dates are missing, or maybe they've just put the years and not the months. 2011 to 2012 might be December 2011 to January 2012. So always worth picking through that before the interview starts. And then just finally, and again, all of this will be on our interview cheat sheet. Some of the types of interviews that you want to put into your 6 to 10 interview questions. So you may have heard of some of these terms before. So strength interviews, competency-based interviews, technical interviews. So again, these are more situational based, and they're designed to kind of understand behaviors and personality, as opposed to can you do X, or when did you last do Y. So, for example, strength-based interview questions are designed to find out what they're good at. And it could simply be, what are you best at? What are you most proud of? In your workspace, what do you do well, or what are you well known for in your business? So again, some of these questions they might have prepped for, others will make them think a little bit more about their experience. Competency based, well, this is talking about specific competencies, so maybe situational based, so give me an example of where you have demonstrated great customer service, or maybe give me an example of a deadline that you had to hit and how did you do it. It's much harder for candidates to prep for these interviews because they're actually drawing on real life experience here. So it's always good to throw a couple of these in just to make them think. And again, remember the 80-20 rule, let them do the talking before you move on to the next question. Just lastly, behavior-based experience. So if a client told you they were contemplating engaging with another supplier, so you might lose them, how would you respond to that? How would you deal with that? And that's a great question to use in an account management role or a sales position or anything where customer facing is important. So again, you can think about behavior-based interviewing questions to try and draw that information out. And just lastly, a few other types of interview styles. So technical interviews tend to be a little bit more maybe hands-on. Perhaps it's an engineering role or a technical role or a role in IT, where you could actually get them to do some little mini project or test on a system. Group interviews like assessment centers are great if you're recruiting at volume and you want to assess candidates back to back. Or you've got the old academic interview where you tend to have a panel of interviewees. So you might cross notes with someone else, and that's quite useful, again, typically used in institutions, academic institutions, where you'll get different viewpoints from different interviewers. So do select the types of interviews you want to put in, and again, we reference those on our cheat sheet, just in case you didn't hear me say that before. Right, okay, well, we've reached the end of our 30 minutes. It always goes incredibly quickly. I'd like to thank you very much for listening and for coming along. We do intend to send out a video copy of this to everyone that attended. If for any reason you are not happy about a video of this going out, then please say no to video in the chat, and we won't do that. But if you're happy for these to go out, then simply say nothing. So yeah, so thank you for watching. We hope that's been of interest to you. We are going to be running webinars each month for the foreseeable future. And if you do have managers or line managers that you think would benefit from a 30-minute interview refresher, please feel free to invite them on to the next one. So thank you again. If you do have any questions that you haven't been able to ask in the chat here, feel free to let us know either on email or message again in the chat, and we'll reach out to you offline. Thank you and have a great day.